A man stands on a beach. 20 years have passed since he left home. His ships are gone, his crew is dead, and the woman who loves him is a goddess. But all he wants is to see his wife again. This is where the Odyssey begins. Not at the beginning, but near the end. Homer, the blind poet who sang this story nearly 3,000 years ago, understood something about how memory works. We don't remember our lives in straight lines. We remember them in fragments, in moments that return to us when we're alone. We piece together who we are from scattered images, a face half remembered, a conversation that happened years ago, the smell of home that hits you unexpectedly and makes everything else fall away. The story of Odysseus isn't just about a journey home. It's about what happens to a person when everything familiar is stripped away. It's about the gap between who we were and who we become. And it's about whether anyone can truly return to a life they left behind. Can you go back to a marriage after 20 years of absence? Can you be a father to a son who's now a grown man? Can you rule a kingdom when the world has moved on without you? For the ancient Greeks, this wasn't just entertainment. This was the story that defined what it meant to be human. To struggle, to endure, to choose survival over comfort, and to face the fact that the gods don't care about fairness. The Greeks didn't believe in heaven or salvation. They believed in kleos, glory, the only form of immortality available to mortals. Your name, your story, sung by poets long after your bones turn to dust. But the Odyssey asks a different question than the Iliad. Achilles, the hero of the Iliad, chose glory over life itself. He knew he could live a long, comfortable life or die young and become legend. He chose legend. His story is about the price of glory, the cost of being remembered. Odysseus makes a different choice. When offered immortality, eternal youth, a goddess for a companion, he says no. He chooses the mortal world, with all its pain and limitation. He chooses to grow old. He chooses death. Because in the mortal world, there's Penelope. We're going to follow Odysseus from that beach backward through 10 years of storms and monsters. We'll meet the people who waited for him, the ones who tried to replace him, and the son who grew up without knowing his father's voice. We'll see what happens when a warrior tries to become a husband again. We'll watch him navigate a world that's stranger than any myth, the world of home. But first, we need to understand where this story comes from, and why it still matters. Why, after 3,000 years, we're still telling it. Why every generation finds something new in these ancient lines. Why soldiers returning from war recognize themselves in Odysseus. Why anyone who's ever been lost, literally or otherwise, hears their own voice in his weeping on that beach. Nobody knows who Homer was. We don't know if Homer was even one person. The name might refer to a tradition, a school of poets, or a single blind singer who walked from town to town in 8th century Greece. Ancient tradition claims Homer was blind, a detail that might be symbolic rather than biographical. In Greek culture, blindness was associated with inner vision, the ability to see truths invisible to those with ordinary sight. The greatest prophet in Greek mythology, Tiresias, was blind. So were many legendary poets and seers. When you can't see the surface of things, maybe you see deeper. What we do know is this. Sometime around 750 BC, someone composed 2 epic poems that would shape Western literature forever. The Iliad told the story of the Trojan War, 19 days of fighting in the 10th year of the siege. The Odyssey told what happened after, the 10-year journey of one man trying to reach home. Together, these poems contain nearly 28,000 lines of verse. That's roughly the length of 4 modern novels, and all of it was composed orally, without writing, to be performed from memory. Let that sink in for a moment. 12,000 lines of the Odyssey alone. That's about 140,000 words, held in someone's head, performed without notes, without prompts, for audiences who knew the story well enough to notice if you got it wrong. These weren't written down at first. They were sung, performed from memory by poets called rhapsodes who travelled from village to village. A rhapsode was part actor, part musician, part historian. He'd stand in the marketplace or at a nobleman's feast, and for hours, sometimes days, he'd sing the ancient stories. He'd modulate his voice for different characters, use gestures to dramatize the action, build tension, and release it with the skill of a modern filmmaker. The audience would be transfixed, living through these stories as if they were happening in real time. The poems were constructed using formulas, repeated phrases that helped the singer remember. Rosy-fingered dawn, wine-dark sea, Odysseus of many devices, grey-eyed Athena, swift-footed Achilles, the hollow ships, the whispering sea. These phrases weren't just decoration. They were mnemonic tools, building blocks that let a poet construct 12,000 lines of verse without a script. Each formula fit perfectly into the rhythm of the verse. Greek epic poetry was composed in dactylic hexameter, a meter with 6 beats per line. The formulas slotted into specific parts of the line like pieces in a puzzle. When the poet needed to say dawn was breaking, he'd reach for rosy-fingered dawn. The phrase filled exactly the right number of syllables and maintained the meter. Every performance was slightly different, adapted to the audience, to the mood, to what the singer remembered in that moment. A poet might expand certain scenes if the audience seemed engaged, or compress others if time was short. He might emphasize different themes depending on who was listening: warriors, merchants, farmers, women. If he was performing for a military audience, he might linger on battle scenes. For a wedding feast, he might emphasize the reunion of Odysseus and Penelope. The poems were alive, changing, responsive to the moment. But beneath this flexibility was a stable core. The major plot points never changed. Odysseus always blinded the Cyclops. He always resisted the Sirens. He always returned to Ithaca and slaughtered the suitors. What changed was the telling, the details, the emphasis, the emotional coloring. One poet might present Odysseus as a suffering hero. Another might emphasize his cunning and deception. Both would be telling the same story, but the meaning would shift. This oral tradition went back centuries. Scholars believe the stories of Troy were passed down through generations of singers, from the Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BC through the Greek Dark Ages and into the Archaic period when Homer lived. Each generation of poets inherited the stories from their teachers, modified them slightly, passed them to their students. It was a living archive, constantly being updated and preserved simultaneously. Homer, whoever Homer was, represents the crystallization of this tradition. He took centuries of accumulated songs and wove them into 2 unified masterpieces. Or perhaps multiple poets worked on the text over generations, and the name Homer became attached to the final product. The ancient Greeks themselves weren't sure. Some cities claimed Homer was born there. 7 different islands said they were his birthplace. Everyone wanted to claim connection to these poems because they defined Greek identity. What matters is what survived. The world these poems described was already ancient when Homer sang them. The Trojan War, if it happened at all, took place around 1200 BC, 500 years before Homer's time. That's the same distance that separates us from the Renaissance. Imagine trying to write about daily life in the 1500s based only on songs and stories passed down orally. You'd get some things right, but much would be distorted, romanticized, or simply invented to fill the gaps. That's what Homer was working with. The poems contain fascinating anachronisms, Bronze Age weapons mixed with Iron Age customs, details from multiple centuries layered on top of each other. The heroes use bronze swords and spears, which fits the Bronze Age setting, but they also cremate their dead and practice other rituals that belong to Homer's own time. Sometimes characters use tactics that wouldn't make sense in Bronze Age warfare. It's like watching a movie about medieval knights where someone accidentally leaves a wristwatch in the frame. But these inconsistencies don't matter. Homer wasn't trying to write history. He was trying to capture something true about human experience. And for that, perfect historical accuracy is less important than emotional truth. For Homer's audience, the age of heroes was a lost world, a time when men were stronger, when gods walked among mortals, when the rules were different. The Mycenaean palaces that produced the heroes of legend had collapsed centuries earlier. Their writing system, Linear B, had been forgotten. The great kingdoms of Agamemnon and Menelaus were ruins. All that remained were stories and broken walls. Homer's Greece was smaller, poorer, more fragmented. It was a world of tiny city-states constantly fighting each other. But it was also a world beginning to blossom into something new. The Greece that would produce democracy, philosophy, theatre, and mathematics. The poems stood at this threshold, looking backward to a heroic past, while Greece stumbled toward a rational future. The poems preserved the memory of that lost world, the way we preserve photographs of grandparents we never met. They represented a golden age, a time of nobility and honor that seemed impossibly distant. When things went wrong in the present, people looked back to the age of heroes and wondered what had been lost. But the Odyssey does something unusual. It takes a hero from that lost age and forces him to confront a world that's changing. Odysseus returns to find that nobody believes in heroes anymore. His wife is surrounded by men who think strength is the only thing that matters. His son has grown up in a world where loyalty is a joke. The old codes, hospitality, honor, respect for the gods, are breaking down. The poem asks a question that every generation has to answer. What do you do when the world you return to isn't the world you left? How do you hold on to values that nobody else respects anymore? Can you restore what's been broken, or do you have to destroy and rebuild? Let's look at how Homer structures this story, because the way he tells it matters as much as what happens. The narrative architecture of the Odyssey is remarkably sophisticated, more complex than most modern novels. It's worth understanding because it reveals how Homer thought about memory, identity, and truth. The Odyssey opens on Ithaca, Odysseus' home island. He's been gone for 20 years, 10 fighting at Troy, 10 trying to get home. Everyone assumes he's dead. His palace is overrun with suitors, young aristocrats who want to marry his wife Penelope and take his throne. They've been living in his house for 3 years, eating his food, drinking his wine, sleeping with his servants, and waiting for Penelope to choose one of them as the new king. We meet Telemachus, his son, now 20 years old. Telemachus was an infant when his father left. He has no memory of Odysseus, no model for what it means to be a man in a world where men take what they want. He's powerless in his own home, watching his inheritance be devoured by parasites he can't remove. The goddess Athena comes to him disguised as a family friend. She tells him to stop being passive. She tells him to go looking for news of his father, to visit the surviving heroes of Troy and ask what they remember. This journey is Telemachus' education, his transition from boy to man. He travels to Pylos, then to Sparta, meeting warriors who knew his father and hearing stories of his greatness. Then, in Book 5, the story cuts to Odysseus. He's trapped on an island with the goddess Calypso, who loves him and offers him immortality if he'll stay. But he refuses. Every day, he sits on the beach and stares at the horizon, weeping. Finally, the gods intervene and force Calypso to let him go. He builds a raft and sails toward home. Poseidon, god of the sea, sees him and raises a storm that destroys the raft. Odysseus washes ashore on the island of Scheria, home of the Phaeacians, a mysterious people who live at the edge of the known world. The Phaeacians welcome him. At their feast, a blind bard sings songs about the Trojan War. When Odysseus hears his own story being told, he begins to weep. The king notices and asks who he is. This is where Homer makes his brilliant choice. Instead of telling the story in chronological order, he starts near the end. Then, halfway through the poem, Odysseus himself tells the story of his 10-year journey. Books 9 through 12 are a first-person flashback, Odysseus narrating his own adventures to the Phaeacians, the Cyclops, the Sirens, the witch Circe, the land of the dead. All of it comes to us filtered through Odysseus's own voice. We don't see these events happen in real time. We hear Odysseus describe them, performing them, choosing what to include and what to leave out. This structure does something powerful. It makes us question whether we can trust the story. Is Odysseus telling the truth, or is he performing? Is he a hero or a survivor who's learned to tell people what they want to hear? Are the monsters real, or are they how Odysseus makes sense of trauma he can't otherwise explain? Homer never answers these questions directly. He just presents Odysseus' story and lets us decide. We know Odysseus is a liar. He admits it, even takes pride in it. His defining characteristic is metis, cunning intelligence, the ability to deceive. He's famous for the Trojan horse, the greatest trick in Greek legend. When he finally reaches Ithaca, he'll spend days lying about who he is, testing people, gathering information before revealing himself. So when this master liar tells us about one-eyed giants and six-headed monsters, are we supposed to believe him? Homer knew that memory isn't objective. The story we tell about ourselves is always shaped by who we need to be in the present. When Odysseus sits in the palace of the Phaeacians, telling his story to a group of comfortable people who've never suffered, he's not just recounting facts. He's creating meaning. He's turning 10 years of chaos and trauma into a narrative with heroes and villains, causes and effects, lessons learned. This is what humans do. We turn our lives into stories because stories have shape and meaning that raw experience lacks. The poem is divided into 24 books, each roughly the length of one evening's performance. Ancient scholars made this division, probably based on how the poem was traditionally performed at festivals. A complete recitation of the Odyssey would take 3 days, 8 hours per day. That's longer than most modern movies, longer than a single football game, longer than most people can maintain attention in our distracted age. But for the Greeks, this was normal. Story wasn't something you consumed in bits. It was something you lived in for days. The first 4 books are called the Telemachy, the story of Telemachus's journey to find news of his father. Books 5 through 8 follow Odysseus from Calypso's island to the land of the Phaeacians. Books 9 through 12 are Odysseus's flashback, his wanderings after leaving Troy. The final 12 books describe his return to Ithaca, the violence that follows, and the restoration of order. The poem begins with an invocation to the Muse. Tell me, Muse, of the man of many devices, who wandered far and wide after he sacked the sacred citadel of Troy. Many were the men whose cities he saw, and whose minds he learned, and many the woes he suffered in his heart upon the sea, seeking to win his own life and the return of his companions. This opening line does something subtle. It doesn't call Odysseus the greatest warrior or the wisest king. It calls him the man of many devices, polytropos in Greek. The word is difficult to translate precisely. It suggests someone who turns many ways, who's adaptable, complex, hard to pin down. It can mean cunning, resourceful, or even shifty, someone who changes shape to suit the situation. Odysseus isn't Achilles, the greatest warrior who ever lived. He's something more complicated. He's a man who survives by changing, by lying when he needs to, by becoming whoever he must be to see another sunrise. He's the hero of intelligence rather than strength, persuasion rather than force. In a world of warriors who solve every problem with violence, Odysseus asks questions first. The Greeks had a word for this kind of intelligence, metis. It meant cunning, practical wisdom, the ability to see through appearances. Metis was the intelligence of the fox, not the lion. It was knowing when to fight and when to flee, when to speak truth and when to lie. how to turn an enemy's strength against him. Metis was survival intelligence, the kind developed by people who can't rely on brute force. Odysseus was the master of Metis. He was the one who thought of the Trojan horse, the trick that finally ended the war after 10 years of stalemate. While other heroes like Ajax and Achilles relied on brute strength, Odysseus used his mind. He was the strategist, the negotiator, the one who saw angles nobody else noticed. When the Greeks were stuck outside Troy's walls, unable to break through, Odysseus realized they didn't need to break the walls. They needed to get inside them. So he built a giant wooden horse, hid soldiers inside, and convinced the Trojans to drag it through their gates. But Metis came with a cost. If you're always adapting, always performing, always becoming someone new to survive, do you remember who you were? If you've told so many lies that lying becomes second nature, can you recognize truth when you find it? If you've been away for 20 years, playing different roles in different places, is there anything of your original self left to bring home? This tension is at the heart of the poem. Odysseus spends 10 years becoming whoever he needs to be: captive, beggar, guest, lover, liar, nobody. When he finally reaches Ithaca, he has to pretend to be a beggar in his own home. He lies to his wife, tests his servants, hides his identity from his own father. The question becomes whether there's anything left of the man who left, or whether Odysseus has become nothing but a collection of masks. Homer's original audience would have known this story already. The pleasure wasn't in finding out what happens, it was in how the story was told. Each performance was an act of collaboration between poet and audience. The audience brought their own memories of other performances, other versions of the tale. They knew Odysseus would blind the Cyclops, but they didn't know exactly how this particular poet would describe it. Would he emphasize the horror or the heroism? Would he linger on the monster's suffering or Odysseus's cunning? This is why the poem feels so alive. It's not a fixed text. It's a living tradition that adapted to each new generation, each new crisis, each new question about what it means to come home. When Athens became a democracy, people read the Odyssey as a story about the relationship between rulers and ruled. When Rome conquered Greece, they read it as a story about how civilization absorbs barbarian strength. Every age finds its own reflection in Homer. The poem was finally written down sometime in the 6th century BC. By then, it had already been performed for 200 years. The tyrant Pisistratus of Athens ordered an official text prepared for performance at the Panathenaic festival. Scholars gathered different versions, compared them, tried to reconstruct what Homer originally sang. The version that survived is probably closest to what was performed in Athens during the city's great religious festivals. But even in written form, the poem retains its oral quality. You can hear it when you read it aloud. The rhythm, the repetitions, the way scenes build and resolve, all of it designed for the human voice. There are passages that only make sense when performed. The repeated formulas that seem redundant on the page serve a purpose when heard. They give the audience time to process what's happening, create a meditative rhythm that pulls you deeper into the story. This matters because the Odyssey is about voice. It's about who gets to tell their story and who gets silenced. The poem is full of storytellers: Odysseus, the bard Demodocus, Helen of Troy, even the dead who speak from the underworld. Each has their own version of events, their own way of making sense of what happened. Each character's story reveals something about who they are and what they've lost. And the act of listening, really listening, becomes a kind of recognition. When Odysseus finally reveals himself to his son, to his wife, to his father, he does it through stories. He tells them things only the real Odysseus would know: the scars, the secrets, the private moments that can't be faked. Because in the end, we're all just the stories we tell about ourselves. Identity isn't fixed. It's performed, narrated, constantly being revised. Odysseus knows this better than anyone. Before we follow Odysseus through his wanderings, we need to understand the world waiting for him. We need to meet the people who've been living in his absence, because Ithaca hasn't been frozen in time while Odysseus was away. It's changed, adapted, begun to forget him. Ithaca is a small, rocky island off the western coast of Greece. It's poor by the standards of the Bronze Age world. No gold mines, no great harbours, no legendary wealth. What it has is strategic location and a king who's clever enough to matter. When the great kings of Greece assembled their fleets to sail for Troy, they wanted Odysseus with them, not for his armies, which were tiny, but for his mind. When the poem opens, Odysseus has been gone for 2 decades. 10 years he spent at Troy. 10 more he's been trying to reach home. In his absence, order has collapsed. The palace is occupied by suitors, over 100 young aristocrats from Ithaca and the surrounding islands. They've come courting Penelope, Odysseus' wife. But they're not waiting politely for an answer. They've moved into the palace. Every day, they feast in Odysseus' hall. They slaughter his cattle, drink his wine, harass his servants. They've been doing this for 3 years. 3 years of constant pressure, constant consumption, constant erosion of everything Odysseus built. This isn't just rude. It's a violation of the most sacred rules of Greek society. The Greeks called it xenia, the law of hospitality. A host was obligated to feed and shelter guests, even strangers, even enemies. The gods themselves enforced this law. Zeus was called Zeus Xenios, Zeus the god of guests. To turn away a stranger was to risk divine punishment. But guests had obligations too. They couldn't overstay, couldn't abuse their host's generosity. The relationship was supposed to be reciprocal, balanced, temporary. You fed someone tonight, and maybe someday they'd feed you. The suitors are guests who've become parasites. They're eating Odysseus' household into bankruptcy. Homer gives us the numbers. Penelope mentions that they slaughter 3 or 4 cattle every single day, along with dozens of sheep and goats. They drink amphora after amphora of wine. They waste more than they consume, throwing food around, smashing pottery, treating the palace like their personal playground. But Penelope can't throw them out, not without a king to enforce her will. A woman in Bronze Age Greece had virtually no legal authority on her own. She's trapped in an impossible position. If she admits Odysseus is dead and remarries, she loses everything. The new king will take over the palace, and her son Telemachus will have no claim to his father's throne. In Greek law, the throne passed through marriage, not blood. Whoever married Penelope would become king of Ithaca. Telemachus would be pushed aside, maybe exiled, maybe killed. But if she keeps refusing, the suitors will eventually force the issue, or worse, kill Telemachus and remove the problem entirely. Penelope's solution is brilliant. She tells the suitors she'll choose one of them as soon as she finishes weaving a funeral shroud for Odysseus' father, old Laertes. It's a reasonable request, the kind of pious duty everyone would understand. Every day, she sits at her loom in the great hall, weaving. The suitors watch her work, counting the days until she's done. But every night, she unravels what she's woven. For 3 years, this trick works. 3 years of weaving and unweaving, creating and destroying, making progress that isn't progress. It's exhausting, maddening work, but it buys time. Eventually, one of her servants betrays her. The suitors discover the ruse, and the pressure intensifies. Now they know she's been lying to them. Now they're angry. Penelope's weaving becomes one of the poem's central images. She's creating and unmaking, stalling time itself, refusing to let the story move forward. In a way, she's doing the same thing Odysseus does, using cunning to survive. Both of them are tricksters, constantly improvising, finding ways to delay the inevitable. But there's a cost. The suitors aren't just draining resources. They're corrupting the entire social order of Ithaca. Young men see that violence and entitlement are rewarded. Nobody respects the old laws anymore. When Telemachus tries to call an assembly, the first one in 20 years, the suitors mock him openly. They laugh at his attempts to assert authority. This is what happens when order breaks down. It's not just that bad things happen, it's that the mechanisms for stopping bad things collapse. Without a king, there's no one to enforce justice. Without consequences, people do what they want. In the middle of this chaos stands Telemachus. Telemachus is 20 years old when the poem begins. He was an infant when his father left for Troy. He has no memory of Odysseus, only stories. People tell him his father was cunning, brave, eloquent. But these are just words. He's never heard his father's voice, never felt his hand on his shoulder, never watched him navigate a difficult situation. The first 4 books of the Odyssey belong to him. They're called the Telemachy, and they tell the story of a young man trying to figure out who he is when his father is a ghost. Telemachus lives in his father's shadow. Everyone remembers Odysseus, his cunning, his courage, his gift for words. But Telemachus doesn't know if he inherited any of that. He's shy, hesitant, easily bullied by the suitors. When they mock him, he has no response. When they waste his inheritance, he watches helplessly. This is the curse of growing up without a father in a patriarchal society. You have no model for manhood except the stories people tell, and stories aren't enough. The goddess Athena comes to him disguised as a family friend, Mentes. She finds him sitting among the suitors, daydreaming. Homer says he was imagining his noble father, picturing Odysseus suddenly appearing and driving the suitors out. Athena tells him it's time to stop imagining. She tells him to call an assembly, to confront the suitors publicly, to go looking for his father. Her advice is simple but revolutionary. Stop being passive. Start acting. Telemachus travels to Pylos to meet Nestor, the oldest Greek warrior who survived Troy. Nestor is ancient now, maybe 80 years old. He's survived 3 generations of warriors. He remembers everything, tells endless stories, gives advice that's sometimes wise and sometimes rambling. Nestor welcomes Telemachus warmly. He remembers Odysseus with respect, even love. Never have I seen the gods show such open affection as Athena showed to your father, Nestor says. But he doesn't know where Odysseus is. He last saw him sailing away from Troy, heading home. After that, nothing. Then Telemachus goes to Sparta to meet Menelaus, Helen's husband, the man whose war brought Odysseus into this nightmare. Menelaus's palace is spectacular. It gleams with bronze and gold, filled with treasures from Troy and Egypt. This is what Ithaca could never be: wealthy, powerful, impressive. When Telemachus sees it, he's overwhelmed. He whispers to his companion that this must be what Zeus's palace looks like. Menelaus and Helen welcome him, and Helen, famous Helen, Helen whose face launched 1,000 ships, recognizes who he must be immediately. That's Odysseus's son, she says. Look at his face, his way of moving. He's exactly like his father. They tell stories about Odysseus long into the night. Menelaus describes how Odysseus saved his life once by thinking quickly in battle. Helen tells a stranger story, about a time when Odysseus snuck into Troy disguised as a beggar, and she recognized him but didn't give him away. The stories paint a picture of a complex man, brave but not reckless, clever but not cruel, capable of great violence when necessary. But Menelaus has news that Nestor didn't. He visited Egypt on his way home from Troy, and there he met an old sea god named Proteus. Proteus told him that Odysseus was alive, trapped on an island by a goddess who wanted him for herself. The news is vague, but it's enough. Odysseus might still be alive. After 20 years, after everyone else has given up hope, there's still a chance. These journeys teach Telemachus something crucial. Everywhere he goes, people remember his father with respect, even love. Odysseus wasn't just a warrior. He was the man who made other men think, the man who asked questions, who saw through appearances, the man who understood that force alone doesn't solve problems. And Telemachus begins to understand something else. These old warriors, Nestor, Menelaus, they see Odysseus in him. They treat him with respect because they remember his father. Maybe, just maybe, he inherited more than he thought. While Telemachus is away, the suitors plot to kill him. They realize he's becoming dangerous. He's no longer the passive boy they could ignore. He's starting to act like a prince, starting to assert authority. If they let this continue, he might actually succeed in driving them out. So they set an ambush at the harbor, planning to murder him when he sails home. This is the moment when the situation becomes irreversible. They're no longer just parasites. They're willing to commit murder to get what they want. They've crossed from being a nuisance to being enemies who must be destroyed. The suitors are led by two men, Antinous and Eurymachus. Antinous is the ringleader, arrogant and cruel. He's the one who proposes killing Telemachus. He treats the servants worst, makes the most vicious jokes, pushes the hardest. Homer makes sure we hate him. Eurymachus is smooth, charming, the kind of man who thinks he can talk his way out of anything. He's more dangerous than Antinous because he's likable. He makes promises he has no intention of keeping. He tells Penelope he'll protect Telemachus, while secretly agreeing to the murder plot. Both of them represent something that was changing in Greek society. They're a new generation that doesn't respect the old codes. They see Odysseus's world, the world of honor and obligation, as outdated. Why wait politely when you can take what you want? Why follow rules when there's no one to enforce them? This conflict between old and new values runs through the entire poem. Odysseus represents a dying world where kings ruled by wisdom and warriors followed codes of conduct. The suitors represent a world where strength is the only currency that matters. Homer doesn't tell us which world to prefer. He just shows us what happens when they collide. Back in the palace, Penelope waits. Penelope is one of the most complex characters in ancient literature. She's not a passive victim. She's as cunning as her husband, as patient, as willing to deceive. Homer calls her periphron, clever-minded, the same word he sometimes uses for Odysseus. But she's also exhausted. 20 years is a long time to wait for someone who might be dead. Every night, she dreams of Odysseus. Every morning, she wakes to a house full of men who want to erase him. The poem gives us glimpses of her grief. She weeps in her bedroom. She interrogates travelers for news. She prays to Athena for guidance. She's haunted by dreams that offer false hope or vague warnings. But Homer also shows us her strength. When the suitors pressure her, she appears before them and extracts gifts, making them pay for the privilege of courting her. It's a brilliant move. She reframes the situation. Instead of being a prize they're competing for, she becomes someone they need to impress. Instead of taking from her, they're giving to her. When they complain, she turns their own words against them. "You claim to be noble suitors," she says. "Well, noble suitors bring gifts. Or have customs changed since my father's time?" Penelope and Odysseus are mirrors of each other. Both survive by adapting. Both use words as weapons. Both understand that sometimes the only way to win is to delay. When they finally meet again after 20 years, it will take them hours to recognize each other, because both have become so good at hiding who they really are. But there's one crucial difference. Odysseus gets to move, to act, to fight. Penelope is trapped in place, forced to perform her resistance through passivity. The poem never lets us forget how limited her options are. As a woman in Bronze Age Greece, she can't rule in her own right. She can't drive the suitors out by force. She can't even leave the palace without causing a scandal. All she can do is wait and hope that the man she married still exists somewhere. There's one more member of this household we need to meet. Laertes, Odysseus's father, has withdrawn from the world. He lives alone on a farm outside the city, dressed in rags, sleeping on the ground among his servants. He's waiting to die. Laertes used to be king. He passed the throne to Odysseus when he was old enough to rule. This was normal in Greek society. Old men stepped aside and let their sons take over. It was supposed to be a relief, a chance to rest after decades of leadership. But now, with Odysseus gone and the suitors destroying everything, Laertes has given up. He's retreated to his farm, stopped bathing, stopped caring for himself. He's performing grief through physical neglect. Homer's description of him is heartbreaking. When Odysseus finally finds him at the end of the poem, Laertes is bent over, digging in the dirt, wearing filthy clothes patched with leather. This is a king, reduced to this. His grief is a reminder of what's at stake. This isn't just about one man coming home. It's about whether the world Odysseus knew can survive his absence. It's about whether order can be restored, or if chaos has won. The suitors, Penelope, Telemachus, Laertes, they're all waiting for the same thing. They're waiting for someone to restore order. But when Odysseus finally arrives, the question becomes whether he's still capable of being that person. Because the man who left Ithaca 20 years ago isn't the man who's coming home. When we first meet Odysseus, he's a prisoner, not in chains, in something more subtle. He's trapped on an island called Ogygia, in the arms of a goddess named Calypso. She loves him. She's offered him immortality if he'll stay with her forever. Every man he sailed with is dead. His ships are splinters at the bottom of the sea. He has no way to leave, no resources, no hope of rescue. And yet, every day, Odysseus sits on the beach and weeps. Homer's description is brief but devastating. He sat on the shore and wept as always, breaking his heart in tears and lamentation and sorrow, as weeping he looked out over the barren sea. This is where the poem begins, with a man who's been offered everything and chooses suffering instead. Calypso means the concealer in Greek. She's a goddess, the daughter of the Titan Atlas, who lives alone on an island at the edge of the world. Her island is paradise, lush meadows, fresh water, caves draped with vines. 4 springs flow with clear water, meadows bloom with violets and celery, birds nest in the trees, owls and hawks and seabirds. When Odysseus washed ashore 7 years earlier, she took him in. He was half dead, the sole survivor of a shipwreck. His crew had been killed by Zeus for eating the cattle of the sun god. The ship was destroyed by lightning. Odysseus clung to the wreckage for 9 days before the current carried him to Ogygia. She fed him, healed him, loved him. She offered him what no human could refuse: eternal life, eternal youth, freedom from death. She promised him they could live together forever, that he'd never grow old, never suffer, never lose anything again. But Odysseus refuses. This scene is crucial to understanding who Odysseus is. He's not the strongest warrior or the wisest king. What makes him a hero is his refusal to forget. Calypso is beautiful, immortal, powerful. Penelope is mortal, aging, trapped in a crumbling palace. Any rational calculation would choose Calypso. Immortality versus death. Eternal youth versus aging. A goddess who loves you versus a wife who might not even be alive. But Odysseus doesn't care about rational calculation. He wants to go home, not to an idea of home, but to the specific, messy, mortal life he left behind. This is what separates him from the other Greek heroes. Achilles chose glory over life. Ajax chose death over dishonor. Odysseus chooses home, even if home is just a memory, even if he's not sure it still exists. The gods finally intervene. The poem opens with a council of the gods on Mount Olympus. Zeus is speaking, and he's annoyed. Humans always blame the gods for their problems, he says. But humans bring suffering on themselves through their own stupidity. He gives an example, Odysseus, who seduced Agamemnon's wife and was eventually killed for it. The gods warned him, but he did it anyway. Athena sees her opening. She brings up Odysseus. Here's a man who never offended the gods, she says. He made proper sacrifices, honored every ritual, and yet he's been trapped for 7 years while men less worthy than him prosper. Why? Zeus knows why. Poseidon is still angry about the Cyclops, but Poseidon isn't here right now. He's off visiting the Ethiopians at the edge of the world. Zeus agrees. It's time to let Odysseus go home. He sends Hermes, the messenger god, to Calypso's island. The message is clear. Let Odysseus go. Calypso is furious. She accuses the gods of hypocrisy. Male gods take mortal lovers all the time, and nobody stops them. Zeus himself has had countless affairs with mortal women, but when a goddess loves a mortal man, suddenly it's a crime. Her speech is one of the poem's most striking moments. For a few lines, we see the double standard built into the divine order. Zeus can seduce anyone he wants, but Calypso has to give up the only person she's ever loved. She lists examples. When Dawn fell in love with Orion, the gods were jealous and killed him. When Demeter loved Iasion, Zeus struck him down with a thunderbolt. The pattern is clear. Goddesses aren't allowed to keep mortal lovers, but she obeys, because even gods have to follow Zeus's orders. She finds Odysseus on the beach. She tells him he's free to go. She'll give him tools to build a raft, provisions for the journey, favorable winds. But first, she asks him one question. Do you really want to go back to her? She reminds him that Penelope is mortal. She's older now, not as beautiful as she was. She'll age, she'll die. I don't claim to match her in form or figure. It's not right for mortal women to rival goddesses in beauty. Odysseus's answer is famous. He doesn't argue. He admits that Calypso is more beautiful than Penelope, more powerful, immortal. I know all that, he says. I know that sensible Penelope is inferior to you in form and stature. She's immortal, and you're immortal and ageless. But he still wants to go home. It's not a romantic answer. It's an existential one. Penelope represents everything that makes life human: time, change, death. Choosing her means choosing mortality. It means accepting that everything ends. It means embracing limitation as the price of meaning. Because immortality, as Calypso offers it, comes with a cost too. If you live forever, nothing matters. If you have infinite time, any particular moment becomes insignificant. Mortality is what gives life stakes. Calypso gives him what he needs. For 4 days, Odysseus builds a raft. He cuts timber, shapes planks, drills holes, weaves rope from vines. The description is surprisingly detailed. Homer wants us to see Odysseus working with his hands, creating something from nothing. It's the first time in 7 years that Odysseus has done something purposeful. The first time he's built toward a goal instead of just existing. The work itself is healing. He builds a raft about as long as a merchant ship, maybe 20 feet. He lashes the logs together, builds a deck, sets up a mast and sail. Calypso gives him tools, bronze axes, augers, chisels, and shows him where the best timber grows. On the 5th day, he sets sail. Calypso gives him provisions: bread, meat, wine, water. She bathes him one last time, gives him clean clothes. She sends a gentle wind to speed him on his way, and then she lets him go. For 17 days, he navigates by the stars. Calypso told him to keep the constellation of the Bear on his left, advice that suggests he's sailing east toward Greece. The Bear, the Greeks knew, was the one constellation that never sets. It circles the North Pole endlessly. By keeping it on his left, Odysseus maintains an eastward course. He doesn't sleep. For 17 days and nights, he sits at the steering oar, watching the stars. He's afraid to close his eyes, afraid this chance will disappear if he stops paying attention. On the 18th day, he sees land. Mountains rising from the sea, the coast of Scheria, home of the Phaeacians. It looks like a shield lying on the misty sea, Homer says. He's almost there, and then Poseidon notices him. Poseidon, god of the sea, has been away visiting the Ethiopians. He's returning to Olympus, traveling across the mountains of the Solymi in distant Asia Minor. From that height, he sees across the sea to Scheria. And there, on the water, is Odysseus. Poseidon's hatred of Odysseus is personal. Years earlier, Odysseus blinded Poseidon's son, the Cyclops Polyphemus. Polyphemus prayed to his father for revenge, and Poseidon answered. He couldn't kill Odysseus, the fates forbade it, but he could make the journey as long and painful as possible. Now, seeing Odysseus so close to safety, Poseidon raises a storm. The description of the storm is terrifying in its precision. Poseidon gathers the clouds, strikes the sea with his trident. He calls up the winds from every direction, north, south, east, and west, all blowing at once. The sea becomes chaos. Waves as tall as mountains rise and crash. Odysseus's raft is torn apart. The mast snaps. The sail rips away. The steering oar is torn from his hands. Odysseus is thrown into the water. For a moment, he sinks. The weight of his clothes drags him down. He can't breathe, can't see, can't tell which way is up. But he fights his way back to the surface. He finds a piece of the raft, clings to it. The waves throw him around like a toy. A sea goddess named Ino sees him and takes pity. She appears as a seabird, lands on his piece of wreckage. She gives him her veil, a magical piece of cloth that will keep him from drowning. Tie this around your chest, she says. Abandon the raft and swim for shore. But Odysseus hesitates. It might be a trick, another god trying to destroy him. He's learned not to trust offers of help. Then another wave smashes his raft to pieces. He has no choice. He ties the veil around his chest and starts swimming. He swims for 2 days and 2 nights. This scene is a microcosm of the entire poem. Odysseus is helpless, naked, stripped of everything, but he survives, not through strength, but through endurance. He doesn't defeat the storm. He just outlasts it. On the 3rd day, the wind finally dies. He sees land ahead, rocky cliffs, waves crashing against them. If he gets thrown against those rocks, he'll be torn apart. Athena helps him. She gives him the strength to swim along the coast until he finds a river mouth. The rocks give way to sand. He prays to the river god for permission to enter. The current stops, and he's able to swim to shore. He washes ashore on Scheria. He's bruised, bleeding, covered in brine. He can barely stand. He crawls into a thicket of olive trees, covers himself with leaves, and sleeps. When he wakes, his real journey begins. Odysseus wakes to the sound of voices. He's naked, caked with salt, hidden in the bushes. Through the leaves, he sees a group of young women playing ball on the beach. They're laughing, carefree, tossing the ball back and forth. It's the first human laughter Odysseus has heard in 7 years. One of them is Nausicaa, princess of the Phaeacians. The Phaeacians are mysterious in Greek mythology. They live on the island of Scheria, somewhere at the edge of the known world. They're close to the gods, so close that the gods visit them without disguise. When the Phaeacians hold a feast, Zeus himself might show up and sit at their table. They have ships that sail by thought, that know the minds of their captains and steer themselves. Their ships need no pilots, Homer says. They know the thoughts and purposes of men. They're shrouded in mist and darkness, and they reach their destinations without error, without fear of damage or shipwreck. They're also the last stop before home. After 10 years of wandering through a world of monsters and magic, Odysseus has finally reached a place that functions like normal human society. The Phaeacians are the bridge between the mythical world and the real one. But first, he has to convince them not to kill him. Odysseus emerges from the bushes holding an olive branch over his groin. He's filthy, wild-looking, terrifying. Homer compares him to a mountain lion driven by hunger, whose eyes blaze as he approaches cattle or sheep. That's what the young women see. The young women scatter, all except Nausicaa. Athena has given her courage. She stands her ground, waiting to see what this strange man will do. Odysseus faces a delicate problem. He needs help desperately. But if he approaches this young woman the wrong way, if he seems threatening, she'll scream and he'll be hunted down and killed. He has one chance to get this right, so he uses words. He speaks carefully. He doesn't approach her. He stays at a distance, keeps his voice gentle. He begins with flattery, but flattery that's thoughtful, not crude. "I am your suppliant, lady. Are you some goddess or a mortal? If you're a goddess, one of those who hold the wide heaven, I think you must be Artemis, daughter of great Zeus. You're like her in beauty, stature, and grace. But if you're one of mortals who live on earth, 3 times blessed are your father and your lady mother, 3 times blessed your brothers. Their hearts must glow with pleasure whenever they see such a flower of a daughter joining the dance. It's a masterclass in rhetoric." He compares her to a goddess, but then immediately pivots. If she's mortal, how lucky her family must be. He makes it about them, not about him wanting anything from her. He presents himself as a suppliant, which invokes divine protection. To turn away a suppliant is to offend Zeus. Then he tells a story. He mentions a young palm tree he once saw at Delos, near the altar of Apollo. He'd travelled there with many men on a voyage that brought him great suffering. When he saw that palm, he was amazed. He'd never seen such a shoot springing from the earth. "Just so, lady, I marvel at you," he says. The comparison is brilliant. It's specific, visual, memorable. It doesn't objectify her. It presents her as something rare and beautiful in the natural world. And it tells her something about him. He's travelled, he's cultured, he knows sacred places. Only then does he ask for help. Just a rag to wear, directions to the city. He makes the request small, manageable. Odysseus knows he's at her mercy. One scream and he's dead. So he makes himself vulnerable, flatters without grovelling, asks without demanding. He performs harmlessness while demonstrating intelligence. Nausicaa sees through it, but she helps anyway. She's young, maybe 16, but she's not naive. "Stranger," she says, "you don't seem like a bad or foolish man." She recognizes what he's doing. She sees the performance. But she also sees that he's genuinely in need. She gives Odysseus clothes, food, directions to her father's palace. She also gives him advice, strategic advice that shows she understands how her society works. "When you enter the city, don't go straight to my father," she says. "Go to my mother, Queen Arete." She sits by the hearth, spinning purple yarn, leaning against a column. Her servants sit around her. My father's throne is placed close to hers. He sits there drinking wine like an immortal. Pass him by and throw your arms around my mother's knees. If she looks kindly on you, then there's hope you'll see your homeland again. This is crucial information. In Phaeacian society, the queen holds real power. Her name, Arete, means virtue or excellence. She settles disputes, makes decisions, commands respect even from men. This is unusual in Greek society, where women typically had no formal authority. Nausicaa is teaching Odysseus how to navigate her world, and she's doing it because she's attracted to him. There's a moment of tension here. Nausicaa is clearly interested in Odysseus. She tells her servants, "If only such a man might be called my husband, living here, and if only it would please him to stay." She imagines marrying him, but Odysseus doesn't take the bait. He thanks her politely, keeps his distance, follows her instructions. He's learned to recognize traps, even pleasant ones. He could stay here, marry a princess, live in comfort. But that's not home. Nausicaa tells him to follow behind her wagon at a distance. She's worried about gossip. If people see them together, they'll assume the worst. Our people here are very judgmental, she explains. Some rude person might see us and say, "Who's this handsome stranger following Nausicaa? Where did she find him? I suppose he'll be her husband. Maybe she's rejected all the local men who court her because she's found some castaway from abroad." She's aware of how her society works, how women's reputations are fragile, how quickly people will talk. Odysseus enters the city alone. Athena helps him. She wraps him in mist so no one can see him as he walks through the streets. She also appears to him disguised as a young girl carrying a water pitcher. Odysseus asks her for directions to the palace. The girl, really Athena, gives him advice similar to Nausicaa's. "Go straight through the hall to my mother," she says. "Don't speak to anyone else. If she favors you, there's hope of returning home." The palace of King Alcinous is magnificent. Bronze walls, golden doors, silver doorposts. Gold and silver dogs guard the entrance, mechanical creatures made by Hephaestus, the smith god. They're immortal, Homer says, ageless watchdogs. Inside, the palace gleams. The walls are bronze, crowned with a blue enamel frieze. Golden youths hold blazing torches, lighting the halls at night. 50 serving women work inside, some grinding grain, some weaving at looms, their hands moving like leaves on a poplar tree. Outside, the gardens bloom year-round. Pears, pomegranates, apples, sweet figs, and olives grow in abundance. The fruit never stops. Winter and summer, there's always something ripe. A warm west wind brings new fruit while others ripen. 2 springs flow through the garden, one watering it, the other flowing to the palace courtyard for the townspeople to draw from. Odysseus stands in the doorway, amazed. It's been 10 years since he saw anything resembling civilization. 10 years of monsters and storms and islands where nothing makes sense. This palace represents order, prosperity, peace, everything he's been trying to reach. Following Nausicaa's advice, he goes straight to Queen Arete. She's sitting by the fire, spinning purple yarn, an image that echoes Penelope at her loom. The king sits nearby, drinking wine with his nobles. Odysseus walks past everyone and falls at the queen's knees. He performs the ritual of supplication. "Arete, daughter of godlike Rhexenor," he says, "I come to you as a suppliant, and to your husband, and to these guests. May the gods grant them prosperity and life, and may each pass on his wealth and privileges to his children. But as for me, help me on my way to my homeland soon, for I've suffered long, far from my friends." Then he sits in the ashes by the fire. It's a deliberate gesture of humility, placing himself as low as possible. There's a long silence. The Phaeacians don't know who this stranger is or what to make of him. He's appeared out of nowhere, speaking Greek, performing their rituals correctly. But he looks like he's been through hell. Finally, an old counselor speaks up. "Alcinous, this isn't right, and it doesn't look good. A guest sitting in the ashes by the fire. Everyone's waiting for you to speak. Come, lift the stranger up, seat him on a silver-studded chair, and tell the heralds to mix more wine so we can pour libations to Zeus, who watches over suppliants, and let the housekeeper give the stranger food from our stores. The laws of hospitality are sacred. The man is a guest, he's a suppliant. To turn him away would be to offend Zeus himself." King Alcinous agrees. He lifts Odysseus up, gives him a seat of honor, orders food and wine. He displaces his own son from the chair next to him to make room for the stranger. But he doesn't ask the stranger's name, not yet. That would be rude. First, you welcome the guest, feed him, make him comfortable. Only then can you ask questions. This is xenia in practice, the sacred law of hospitality that governs all Greek society. The stranger might be a god in disguise. The stranger might someday save your life. You treat them well because the universe is unpredictable, and reciprocity is the only insurance policy that works. After the meal, Queen Arete finally speaks. She's noticed something. "Stranger," she says, I'll be the first to question you. Who are you, and where do you come from? Who gave you these clothes? Didn't you say you came here wandering over the sea? She's recognized the clothes. They're from her household. She wove them herself, or supervised their weaving. She knows someone gave them to him, and she wants to know who. Odysseus tells her a version of the truth. He explains that he was held on Calypso's island for 7 years. He describes his escape, the storm, his shipwreck on their coast. He praises Nausicaa for her kindness and wisdom. Your daughter found me, he says. She gave me food and clothing, and she gave me excellent advice about how to approach you. He's careful to protect Nausicaa's reputation. He doesn't mention that she was alone with him on the beach. He presents her as noble, generous, wise, exactly how her parents would want to see her. Alcinous is impressed. He even suggests that Odysseus might want to marry Nausicaa and stay in Phaeacia. I'd give you a house and possessions if you'd be willing to stay, he says. It's the second marriage offer Odysseus has received in a few chapters, but he turns this one down too. The next day, Alcinous holds a feast in Odysseus's honor. The entire kingdom assembles. They slaughter 12 sheep, 8 pigs, and 2 oxen for the feast. There are athletic contests: boxing, wrestling, racing, jumping, discus throwing. The young Phaeacian men show off their strength and skill. One of them, Laodamas, challenges Odysseus to compete. Odysseus refuses at first. He's tired, grief-stricken, not interested in games. My mind is on sorrows, not sports, he says. But another young man, Euryalus, insults him. No, I don't think you're skilled in any of the contests that men engage in, Euryalus says. You're probably just a merchant, a captain of a trading ship, thinking about cargo and profits. You don't look like an athlete. It's a calculated insult. Merchants were looked down on in aristocratic Greek society. A real nobleman, the implication goes, wouldn't concern himself with trade. Something snaps in Odysseus. He stands up. Stranger, he says, you don't speak well. You're like a reckless man. The gods don't grant all gifts to everyone. Not beauty, not brains, not eloquence. One man may be inferior in looks, but the god crowns his words with beauty, and people watch him with pleasure as he speaks with steady modesty. Another may look like a god, but there's no grace in his words. You're like that, beautiful in form, but your mind is empty. Then he picks up a discus, not just any discus, the heaviest one, bigger than the ones the Phaeacians use. He whirls and throws it. The stone hums through the air. The Phaeacians duck. The discus flies far beyond every other mark. Athena, disguised as a Phaeacian, marks the spot. Even a blind man could find your mark, stranger, she says. It's not mixed up with the others. It's far beyond them all. Then Odysseus challenges them. Match that, young men, and then I'll throw another just as far, or farther. If anyone here wants to test me, come on. Boxing, wrestling, running, I don't care. You've angered me. I'll compete with anyone except Laodamas, my host. Only a fool quarrels with his host. Nobody accepts. It's a brief moment, but it tells us something important. Odysseus isn't just clever, he's dangerous. 10 years of war and 10 years of survival haven't made him soft. The rage is still there, just beneath the surface. Alcinous smooths things over. He apologizes for Euryalus' rudeness, has gifts brought for the stranger. The feast continues. A blind bard named Demodocus sings for the guests. His first song is about the Trojan War. He sings about a quarrel between Odysseus and Achilles, an argument that apparently happened early in the war. We don't know this story from any other source. It might be Homer's invention, or it might be from a lost cycle of poems about Troy. As Odysseus listens, he begins to weep. He covers his face with his cloak so nobody will see, but Alcinous notices. He stops the song. He suggests they go outside, give their guests some air, continue with the athletic contests. This detail is crucial. Demodocus is singing about real events, but they're already becoming legend. For the Phaeacians, the Trojan War is a story, entertainment, something that happened long ago to other people. For Odysseus, it's trauma. It's the place where his life broke in half. Later, Demodocus sings again. This time, Odysseus requests the song. He asks Demodocus to sing about the Trojan horse, the trick that ended the war. Demodocus begins. He describes how Odysseus thought of the plan, how the Greeks built the horse, how they hid soldiers inside and left it as an offering to the gods, how the Trojans dragged it inside their city walls, not knowing what it contained, how they debated what to do with it. Some wanted to break it open, some wanted to push it off a cliff, some wanted to let it stand as a sacred offering. And how that night, when the city was celebrating victory, the Greeks emerged from the horse and burned Troy to the ground. Demodocus sings of the slaughter, how the Greeks poured through the city, killing everyone they found, how Odysseus and Menelaus went to the house of Deiphobus, fought the hardest battle, and finally won with Athena's help. Again, Odysseus weeps. Homer compares him to a woman whose city has just been sacked, a woman who watches her husband die in battle, who sees her city burning, who's being dragged away into slavery. She clings to her husband's body, wailing, but enemy soldiers beat her with spears and drive her into captivity. Her cheeks are wasted with grief. It's a startling comparison. Odysseus, the architect of Troy's destruction, is compared to Troy's victims. The hero who won the war is weeping like a captured Trojan woman. This is Homer's genius. He doesn't let us forget that Odysseus is both hero and destroyer. The man who won the war is haunted by what he did to win it. Victory has a human cost, and Odysseus understands that cost in a way the celebrating Phaeacians don't. Alcinous finally asks the question, "Friend, you've been weeping secretly while the bard sang about the Greeks and Troy. Some god must have spun this thread and brought disaster to those men so that their suffering would become song for future generations. Did some kinsman of yours die at Troy, a good man, a brother-in-law or father-in-law, or perhaps a companion, a friend who knew your mind? A good friend can be as close as a brother." Alcinous doesn't know who this stranger is, but he knows the man is connected to these stories somehow. Odysseus answers, "I am Odysseus, son of Laertes, known to all men for my cunning. My fame reaches to heaven. My home is Ithaca," and then he begins to tell his story. Odysseus' story begins with a crime. When the Greeks finally left Troy, they were exhausted. 10 years of siege warfare, watching friends die, killing men they'd never met, living in camps on the beach, eating whatever they could scavenge or steal, watching the city walls and waiting for them to break. They just wanted to go home. But war doesn't end cleanly. Odysseus commanded 12 ships, about 600 men. These were his companions, the men who'd followed him to Troy and survived. They sailed north from Troy along the coast of Thrace. After a few days, they reached the city of Ismarus, home of the Cicones. The Cicones were allies of Troy. They'd fought on the wrong side. During the war, they'd sent troops to help defend the city. Now Troy was gone, and the Greeks were settling scores. Odysseus and his men sacked the city. Homer's description is brief and brutal. They killed the men. They took the women and the treasure. They divided the plunder on the beach, so everyone got an equal share. This is what Greek warriors did. Sacking cities wasn't a crime. It was how you paid your men. There were no salaries in the Bronze Age. Warriors fought for plunder, for slaves, for glory. The whole economic system ran on this cycle of violence, but Odysseus, telling this story years later to the Phaeacians, doesn't celebrate it. He doesn't boast about his victories or describe the battle in loving detail. He just states what happened. We came, we killed, we took. There's a weariness in his telling, a sense that this isn't something he's proud of anymore. After the raid, Odysseus wanted to leave immediately. He gave the order, Get back to the ships, set sail while we still can. But his men wouldn't listen. They insisted on celebrating. They'd just won a victory, taken plunder. They wanted to enjoy it. They slaughtered sheep, opened jars of wine, feasted on the beach. I urged them to flee quickly, Odysseus says, but they were fools and wouldn't listen. It was a mistake. The Cicones who escaped the city fled inland. They gathered reinforcements, other Cicones who lived in the interior, warriors who fought from chariots. These weren't coastal traders. These were professional soldiers. At dawn, they attacked. The battle lasted all day. The Greeks fought hard, but they were outnumbered and hungover. They'd been up all night drinking and eating. They were in no shape to fight a pitched battle against fresh troops. Homer gives us specific numbers. 6 men from each ship were killed. 72 men total. A tenth of Odysseus's force, gone in a single day. The survivors fled to their ships and sailed away. This is the first lesson of the Odyssey. Violence has consequences. You can't sack a city, steal its treasure, and expect to walk away clean. The world pushes back. But there's something else here too. Odysseus couldn't control his men. They wouldn't listen when he told them to leave. This failure to command, this gap between wisdom and authority, will haunt him for the rest of the journey. A leader who can't make his people follow him isn't really a leader. And Odysseus, for all his intelligence, struggles with this throughout the poem. He can see what needs to be done, but he can't always make it happen. They sailed away from Ismarus, grieving for their lost companions. Homer says they called out 3 times for each dead man. It was a ritual, a way of honoring the dead, even when you couldn't bury them properly. They sailed for 9 days. On the 10th day, they should have reached the southern tip of Greece, Cape Malea. If they'd rounded the cape, they would have been home in a week. They could see it ahead of them, the familiar coastline. But a storm hit. The north wind came down hard, tearing their sails. They lowered the sails and rowed. For 2 days, they rowed against the wind and the current. On the 3rd day, they put the sails back up. But the wind kept driving them south and west, away from Greece. For 9 more days, the winds drove them west across the sea. When the storm finally cleared, they had no idea where they were. They'd crossed from the known world into something else. The geography Homer describes from this point on is impossible to map. Scholars have tried for centuries to identify the real locations of Odysseus's adventures. Where was the land of the Cyclopes? Where did Circe live? The answers don't matter, because these aren't real places. They're psychological spaces, stages where Odysseus confronts different aspects of what it means to be human. The storm has blown him out of the world he knows into the world of myth. They landed on an island. The island was lush, green, peaceful. Meadows full of flowers, fresh water flowing from springs. There were people there, friendly, welcoming. They had no weapons, no cities, no apparent organization. They just lived in the meadows, eating what grew naturally. They offered the Greeks food, a sweet fruit that grew on flowering plants. The men who ate the fruit forgot everything. They forgot their homes. They forgot their families. They forgot they wanted to leave. They forgot what it felt like to desire anything. All they wanted was to stay on the island and eat more lotus. This is the land of the lotus eaters. Homer doesn't describe the lotus in detail. We don't know if it's a drug, magic, or just a really good fruit. What matters is the effect. It erases desire. It dissolves the need to strive, to achieve, to return home. The men under the lotus's spell aren't suffering. They're perfectly content. They've found paradise, a place where you never have to struggle, never have to fight, never have to remember what you've lost. They're like people who've given up, who've decided that trying isn't worth it. Odysseus sees it immediately. This is another kind of trap. It's more subtle than Calypso's island, but it's the same basic offer. Forget the past, forget your goals, forget who you were. Just exist, peacefully, without pain. Odysseus rounds up the men who ate the lotus. They don't want to leave. They beg to stay, weep, plead. So Odysseus ties them up. He drags them back to the ships, physically carries them if necessary. He locks them in the hold below the rowing benches. Then he orders everyone else to row away as fast as possible. He's afraid more men will eat the lotus. He's afraid he'll eat it himself. This scene is brief, only a few lines in Homer's text, but it introduces one of the poem's central questions. What is paradise? The lotus eaters offer a life without pain. No grief, no loss, no longing. Just eternal contentment, like a permanent high. You never have to try anymore. You never have to face the fact that life is hard. But contentment without desire isn't life, it's forgetting. Odysseus chooses memory. He chooses to remember his wife, his son, his home, even though remembering hurts, even though it would be easier to forget, even though he has no guarantee he'll ever see them again. This choice will define the rest of his journey. Again and again, he'll be offered a way to forget. Calypso offers immortality and oblivion. The lotus eaters offer peace and forgetfulness. Later, the sirens will offer knowledge that erases the need to keep struggling. Again and again, Odysseus will refuse. He chooses suffering over comfort, memory over peace, struggle over surrender. Not because he's a hero in the traditional sense, strong, fearless, invincible, but because he refuses to become someone else. They sailed away from the island. The men who'd eaten the lotus eventually recovered. Their memories returned, and with them, their grief. They remembered who they were, where they were supposed to be, everyone they'd lost. But at least they remembered who they were. At least they were still themselves, still capable of wanting something, still able to imagine home. The next island they reached would test that determination in a completely different way. The next island they reached was different. There was smoke rising from the hills, bleating of sheep and goats, signs of life, but no city, no harbour, no ships, just rough coastline and a sense of something massive moving in the interior. Odysseus anchored the fleet on a small offshore island. It was uninhabited but fertile. Goats ran wild there, and fresh water flowed from springs. The men hunted the goats and feasted. For one night, they ate well and rested. At dawn, Odysseus took his own ship and 12 of his best men to scout the mainland. He brought a goat skin of special wine with him. It was a gift from a priest of Apollo, wine so strong you had to mix it with 20 parts water before drinking. 1 cup could make a man drunk for hours. Odysseus brought it because he had a feeling he might need to bargain with whoever lived here. They found a cave near the shore. The cave was enormous, clearly the home of a shepherd. Inside, there were pens full of lambs and kids, separated by age. The spring-born in one section, the summer-born in another, the newborns in a third. Racks of cheese aged on shelves, hanging from the ceiling. Buckets and bowls swam with whey. Everything was organized with surprising care. Odysseus's men wanted to steal what they could and leave. Take the cheese, drive the animals to the ship, sail away before the owner returned. It was good advice. But Odysseus was curious. He wanted to meet whoever lived here. Maybe they'd offer gifts, as was customary when strangers met. Maybe they'd provide information about where exactly they were. It was a mistake that would cost him 6 years and 500 men. At sunset, the shepherd returned. He was a cyclops, one of a race of giants who lived on the island. He had a single eye in the middle of his forehead. He was massive, the size of a mountain peak. Homer says he didn't look like a man who eats bread, but like a wooded crag of high mountains, appearing alone, apart from others. His name was Polyphemus. Polyphemus drove his flock into the cave. Usually he left the rams and he-goats outside, but tonight, by chance or divine intervention, he drove them all in. Then he picked up a boulder, a stone so massive that 22 four-wheeled wagons couldn't move it, and rolled it across the entrance. Odysseus and his men were trapped. The Cyclops sat down and began milking his ewes and bleating goats, all in proper order. He set lambs and kids to suckle at each mother. He curdled half the white milk and placed it in wicker baskets. The other half he set aside in bowls for drinking. The routine was meticulous, organized, almost domestic. Then he built a fire. In the firelight, he saw the Greeks huddled in the corner. "Strangers, who are you?" he demanded. "Where do you sail from over the watery ways? Are you trading, or do you wander recklessly like pirates, roaming the sea and bringing evil to strangers?" His voice was huge, terrifying. The men's hearts sank with fear. But Odysseus tried the proper approach. He explained that they were Greeks, returning from Troy. He invoked Zeus, god of guests and suppliants. He asked for hospitality, as was his right under Greek law. "We come to your knees in hope that you'll give us a guest gift, or otherwise show us the kindness that's due to strangers," Odysseus said. "Respect the gods, good sir. We're your suppliants, and Zeus is the avenger of suppliants and guests." Polyphemus laughed. "You're a fool, stranger, or you've come from far away if you tell me to fear the gods or avoid their anger," he said. "The Cyclopes pay no attention to Zeus or the blessed gods. We're much stronger than they are. I wouldn't spare you or your companions to avoid Zeus's enmity unless my spirit moved me to it." Then he asked where they'd left their ship. It was a test, maybe, or just curiosity. But Odysseus lied. His cunning mind immediately saw the danger. "Poseidon the Earthshaker smashed my ship," Odysseus said. "He drove it against the rocks at the edge of your land, and the wind carried it from the sea. But I escaped with these men." Polyphemus didn't answer. He reached out, grabbed two of the men, and smashed them against the cave floor like puppies. Their brains spattered on the ground. He tore them limb from limb and ate them. He ate everything: flesh, bones, organs. Like a mountain lion, Homer says, leaving nothing behind. The Greeks watched in horror, raising their hands to Zeus in prayer, but there was nothing they could do. This is a crucial moment. Odysseus has encountered something completely outside the human world. The Cyclops doesn't follow any of the rules that make civilization possible. He lives alone, recognizes no laws, respects no gods. He has no city, no community, no obligations to anyone. He's pure appetite, pure will, accountable to nothing. The Cyclopes represent life without civilization, not noble savagery or pastoral innocence, but the brutality of pure self-interest. They don't farm, though the land is fertile. They don't sail, though the harbors are perfect. They don't trade, don't make laws, don't build cities. Each one lives alone in his cave with his flocks, giving orders to his wife and children, caring nothing for his neighbors. It's Homer's vision of what life looks like without community, without reciprocity, without the bonds that make us human. After eating, Polyphemus lay down among his sheep and slept. Odysseus thought about killing him. He drew his sword, felt for the spot where the diaphragm cradles the liver. One thrust, and the monster would die. But then Odysseus realized, even if they killed him, they'd be trapped. They couldn't move the stone blocking the entrance. They'd die slowly in the cave, sealed in with the corpse. So they waited for dawn, groaning in their hearts. In the morning, the Cyclops ate 2 more men for breakfast. Then he rolled away the stone, drove his flock out to pasture, and rolled the stone back into place. The Greeks were still trapped. Odysseus spent the day planning. He found a massive wooden club, the Cyclops' walking staff, lying in the cave. It was green olive wood, as thick as the mast of a 20-oared ship. Odysseus cut off a section about 6 feet long. He gave it to his men to smooth down. Then he sharpened one end to a point and hardened it in the fire. Finally, he hid it under a pile of dung that lay thickly throughout the cave. That evening, the Cyclops returned. Again he drove all the flocks inside. Again he rolled the stone across the entrance. Again he grabbed 2 men and ate them. Then Odysseus offered him wine. He approached with a wooden bowl filled with the dark, sweet wine he'd brought from the ship. "Cyclops, try this wine after your meal of human flesh," Odysseus said. "See what kind of drink our ship held. I was bringing it as an offering if you would pity me and help me on my way home. But your rage is unbearable. How can any other human being ever visit you when you act so lawlessly?" The Cyclops took the bowl and drank. He loved it. He demanded more. Odysseus gave him more. 3 bowls in total. The wine was meant to be mixed with 20 parts water, but the Cyclops drank it unmixed, pure and strong. It went straight to his monstrous head. "Tell me your name, stranger," the Cyclops said, his voice already slurring. "I want to give you a guest gift, something you'll enjoy. We Cyclopes have wine too. The rain from Zeus makes our grapes grow. But this drink is a stream of nectar and ambrosia." Odysseus saw his opening. "You ask my famous name, Cyclops? I'll tell you, and you give me the guest gift you promised. My name is Nobody. Nobody is what my mother and father call me, and so do all my companions." The Cyclops laughed, a terrible sound. "Then here's the guest gift I'll give you, Nobody. I'll eat Nobody last, after all his companions. That's my gift to you." Then he collapsed backwards, drunk. His thick neck bent to one side. Wine and chunks of human flesh poured from his mouth. Odysseus pulled the stake from its hiding place. He thrust it into the fire and watched it heat. He encouraged his men. If anyone lost courage now, they were all dead. When the olive wood stake glowed, ready to burst into flame though it was green, he pulled it from the fire. His men grabbed the stake. They drove it into the Cyclops' eye, and Odysseus twisted it from above, spinning it like a shipwright boring a hole in a timber with a drill. They twisted the stake in his eye, and blood flowed around the hot point. The description is brutal and precise. The fire singed his eyelid and brow all around as the eyeball burned. Its roots crackled in the flame. It hissed the way iron hisses when a smith plunges it into cold water to temper it. Polyphemus screamed. The rock echoed terribly. The men scattered in fear. The Cyclops tore the stake from his eye, covered in blood, and hurled it away. He roared for help. The other Cyclopes heard him. They came from all directions, living in caves throughout the windy peaks. They stood outside his cave and called in. "What's wrong, Polyphemus, that you cry out through the immortal night and keep us from sleeping? Is some mortal driving off your flocks against your will? Is someone trying to kill you by force or treachery?" From inside the cave, mighty Polyphemus answered, "My friends, nobody is killing me by treachery, not by force." The other Cyclopes didn't understand. "Well, if nobody is harming you and you're alone, there's no escaping the sickness sent by great Zeus," they called back. "You should pray to your father, Lord Poseidon." And they went away. Odysseus laughed in his heart. His name, his trick with words, had deceived them perfectly. This is Odysseus at his most brilliant. He used language as a weapon, turned the Cyclops' question into a trap. The name Nobody, autis in Greek, becomes both a disguise and a defensive barrier. It's pure metis, the cunning intelligence that defines Odysseus. But they still had to escape. The blinded Cyclops groped his way to the entrance, removed the stone, and sat in the doorway. He spread his arms wide, hoping to catch the men if they tried to slip out with the sheep. He assumed they'd be foolish enough to try, but Odysseus had already thought of this. While the Cyclops slept, Odysseus had tied the rams together with willow branches, 3 by 3. Under the middle ram of each group, hidden by the thick fleece, was one of his men. 2 rams on either side provided cover. At dawn, the rams bleated, wanting to go to pasture. Their udders were swollen. They hadn't been milked. The Cyclops felt each animal as it passed. He ran his hands over their backs, but never thought to check underneath. One by one, the men escaped. Odysseus went last, clinging to the belly of the largest ram. The Cyclops felt this ram and spoke to it. "Sweet ram, Why are you the last of the flock to leave the cave? You've never lagged behind before. You're always first to crop the tender flowers of grass, first to reach the river, first to want to return to the sheepfold in the evening. Now you're last of all. Are you grieving for your master's eye, which that evil man blinded with his wicked companions after overpowering me with wine? That nobody, I tell you, he hasn't escaped destruction yet. If only you could feel as I do, if only you could speak and tell me where he's hiding from my rage. Then I'd smash his brains on the ground and scatter them throughout the cave, and my heart would find relief from the evils that worthless nobody brought me. He let the ram pass. Odysseus and his men ran to the ship. They drove the stolen sheep aboard. Their companions wept when they saw them. 6 men were missing. But Odysseus stopped their crying with a gesture and ordered them to load the sheep quickly and row away. They pushed off and rowed hard. When they were as far offshore as a man's voice carries, Odysseus shouted back at the Cyclops. This was his fatal mistake. "Cyclops," he shouted, "if any mortal asks you who blinded you so shamefully, tell them it was Odysseus, sacker of cities, son of Laertes, who makes his home in Ithaca." His men begged him to stop. They knew it was dangerous, but Odysseus couldn't help himself. He'd outwitted the monster, and he needed the monster to know who'd beaten him. He needed the credit, the kleos, the glory. Polyphemus heard the name. He remembered something. A prophecy. A seer had once told him that a man named Odysseus would come and blind him. "But I always expected someone tall and handsome," Polyphemus said. "A man of great strength. Instead, this little worthless weakling blinded me after overpowering me with wine." Then he prayed to his father, "Hear me, Poseidon, dark-haired holder of the earth. If I'm truly your son, and you claim to be my father, grant that Odysseus, sacker of cities, son of Laertes, who makes his home in Ithaca, never reaches home. But if he's fated to see his friends and reach his well-built house and native land, let him arrive late and in misery after losing all his companions in someone else's ship, and let him find trouble at home." Poseidon heard the prayer. From that moment, Odysseus's fate was sealed. Everything that happens afterward, the storms, the delays, the deaths of all his men, the chaos waiting in Ithaca, flows from this single moment of pride. The Cyclops couldn't see where the ship was, but he grabbed a massive rock and hurled it. It landed just in front of the ship's bow. The sea surged under the falling rock, and the wave pushed them back toward shore. Odysseus grabbed a long pole and pushed off from land again. He urged his men to row, nodding with his head because he didn't dare shout. They bent to their oars. When they'd gone twice as far, Odysseus started to shout again. His men begged him not to. "Don't provoke him, Captain," they pleaded. "He almost killed us all with that first throw. If he hears your voice again, he'll crush our ship and our heads with it." But Odysseus wouldn't listen. His proud spirit had to speak. This episode is the fulcrum of the entire poem. Everything that happens afterward, the storms, the delays, the deaths of all his men, flows from this single moment of pride. Odysseus couldn't let his victory be anonymous. He had to claim credit, had to make sure his name lived on. The Greeks called it hubris, excessive pride, the arrogance of thinking you're above divine law. Odysseus's hubris would cost him everything. 6 more years wandering, every single one of his companions dead, arriving home alone on someone else's ship to find his house full of enemies. Everything Polyphemus prayed for came true. They rejoined the rest of the fleet at the offshore island. The other men were waiting anxiously, fearing they were dead. When they saw the ship approaching, they wept with joy. But when they learned that 6 men were missing, they wept again. Odysseus divided the stolen sheep equally among the crews so everyone got a fair share. His own crew gave him the great ram as a special prize. He sacrificed it to Zeus, burning the thigh bones as an offering. But Zeus didn't accept the sacrifice. He was already planning how to destroy all of Odysseus's ships and companions. They feasted all day until sunset, eating meat and drinking wine. At dawn, they set sail again. They sailed away from the land of the Cyclopes, glad to escape death, but grieving for their lost companions. After escaping the Cyclops, Odysseus and his fleet sailed to the floating island of Aeolia. This was the home of Aeolus, keeper of the winds. Aeolus wasn't quite a god, and not quite immortal, somewhere in between, one of those liminal figures who inhabited the edges of Greek mythology. Zeus had given him authority over the winds, the power to calm them or stir them up. He lived with his 6 sons and 6 daughters on an island that drifted across the sea. The island was surrounded by sheer bronze cliffs and an unbreakable wall. Inside, his palace was magnificent. His children had married each other, the sons married the daughters, and they lived together in eternal feasting. Aeolus welcomed Odysseus and his men. For a month, he hosted them generously. He asked questions about Troy, who fought, who died, how the city finally fell. Odysseus told him everything. When it was time to leave, Aeolus gave Odysseus a gift. It was a leather bag sewn shut with silver wire. Inside were all the storm winds of the world. Aeolus had trapped them, captured them like prisoners, sealed them away so Odysseus would have calm seas for his journey home. Only the west wind was left free, gentle, steady, blowing directly toward Ithaca. It was an extraordinary gift. With the storm winds imprisoned, nothing could stop Odysseus from reaching home. For 9 days, they sailed with perfect weather. Odysseus didn't sleep. For 9 days and nights, he stood at the steering oar, holding the sheets in his hand, refusing to let anyone else navigate. He didn't trust anyone with this. He was too close to home to risk a mistake. On the 10th day, they saw Ithaca. They were so close that they could see people tending fires on the beach. Odysseus could almost smell home. And then, finally, he fell asleep. Sweet sleep overtook him, exhausted from 9 days without rest. While he slept, his crew started talking. They'd noticed the leather bag. Odysseus had guarded it carefully throughout the voyage, keeping it close, never letting it out of his sight. They assumed it was treasure, gold and silver from Aeolus. They grew resentful. "Look how beloved and respected Odysseus is wherever he goes," they said to each other. "He's bringing home all sorts of fine plunder from Troy, while we who made the same journey come back with empty hands. And now Aeolus has given him even more gifts, probably gold and silver. Let's see what's in the bag and count up how much gold and silver it holds." It was a reasonable suspicion. In their world, leaders did get the best spoils, and Odysseus had been secretive about the bag's contents. So they opened it. The winds exploded out. Instantly, a hurricane rose. The storm winds, freed from their prison, howled in every direction at once. The ships were torn away from Ithaca, driven back across the sea they'd just crossed. Odysseus woke to chaos. For a moment he considered throwing himself overboard and drowning. They'd been so close, within sight of home, within hours of landing. Now all that progress was erased. But he covered his head with his cloak and endured. He lay down in the ship and let the evil winds carry them back. For 6 days they sailed day and night, blown backward. On the 7th day, they arrived back at Aeolia, back where they'd started. Odysseus went to Aeolus's palace. He found the king feasting with his family. He sat down in the doorway and explained what happened, his crew's stupidity, his own exhaustion. He begged for help again. Aeolus's response was cold. "Get out of my island at once, most shameful of all living things," Aeolus said. "I have no right to help or send on his way a man who's hated by the blessed gods. Get out. You must be cursed if you've come here like this." This is a turning point in Odysseus's story. Up until now, he's been unlucky. But now, people are starting to see him as cursed. The gods aren't just making his journey difficult. They're actively working against him, and curses spread. Anyone who helps a cursed man might be drawn into his doom. Aeolus, who'd been generous before, now won't risk divine anger by helping again. Odysseus left the palace, groaning in his heart. They sailed for 6 days. This time, Odysseus let his men help with the rowing. He'd learned he couldn't do everything alone, but the lesson came too late. On the 7th day, they reached another coast, the land of the Laestrygonians. It was a perfect natural harbour. High cliffs on either side formed a narrow entrance. Inside, the water was calm, protected from storms, with room for many ships. The fleet sailed into the harbour, all except Odysseus. Something made him cautious. Maybe divine warning, maybe just experience. He tied his ship to a rock outside the harbour, at the mouth of the entrance. Then he sent 3 scouts inland to explore. They found a path and followed it. They met a girl drawing water from a spring. She was tall, the daughter of the Laestrygonian king. She told them her father lived in the city and showed them the way to his house. When they entered the palace, they found the queen, a woman as tall as a mountain peak. The scouts were horrified. The queen called her husband, King Antiphates. He came immediately and grabbed one of the scouts. He planned to eat him for dinner. The other 2 ran. The king raised the alarm. Thousands of Laestrygonians came running, not like men, but like giants. They gathered rocks from the cliffs, boulders as big as a man could lift. Then they ran to the harbour. They lined the cliffs on both sides of the entrance. They looked down at the Greek ships trapped below, and they started dropping rocks. The boulders crashed through the holes. The ships splintered like kindling. Men screamed as the stones crushed them. The Laestrygonians came down with spears and harpooned the sailors like fish. They carried the bodies back to their city to feast on. 11 ships were destroyed in minutes. Odysseus's ship was the only one that escaped. He cut the mooring line with his sword and ordered his men to row for their lives. "Lean into your oars," he shouted. "Row if you want to escape death." They rowed in terror, churning the water white. They rowed until they couldn't see the harbour anymore, until the screaming faded behind them. When they finally stopped, Odysseus counted his losses. He'd started with 12 ships, 600 men. Now he had 1 ship left, 45 men. More than 500 of his companions were dead. This disaster is different from the Cyclops. The Laestrygonians aren't sympathetic. They're not misunderstood or acting from understandable motives. They're just monsters who eat people. Homer doesn't explain why this happened. It's not punishment for some crime Odysseus committed. It's not even divine intervention. It's just the world being cruel and random. Sometimes, the only reason you survive is luck. Odysseus lived because his instinct told him not to sail into that harbour. 500 men died because they trusted what looked like a perfect anchorage. They sailed on with heavy hearts, glad to escape death, but grieving for their lost companions. They reached another island. This one was called Aea, and it was green, quiet, seemingly peaceful. They pulled their ship onto the beach and lay there for 2 days and nights, exhausted by grief and labour. On the 3rd day, Odysseus took his spear and sword and climbed a rocky height to scout. In the distance, he saw smoke rising from a clearing in the forest. He thought about sending men to investigate, but decided to return to the ship first. As he walked back, a god took pity on him. He came across a huge stag with towering antlers. He killed it, dragged it back to the ship. For the first time in days, his men had something to eat besides fish. They feasted all day until sunset. The next morning, Odysseus divided his men into 2 groups. He would lead one group, and Eurylochus, his most trusted companion, would lead the other. They drew lots to see which group would explore the island. Eurylochus's lot came out. He took 22 men and went into the forest, following the smoke. Odysseus and the rest stayed with the ship, watching them disappear into the trees. Eurylochus and his men found a palace in a forest valley. Around the palace prowled wolves and lions, moving on their hind legs. But they weren't wild. They were tame, almost friendly. They wagged their tails and rubbed against the men's legs like dogs greeting their master. The men were terrified but confused. These were obviously predators, but they weren't attacking. Inside the palace, a woman was singing. Her voice was beautiful, unearthly. She was working at a great loom, weaving something that shimmered and glowed, the kind of fine, intricate work that only goddesses make. The men called out. The woman came to the door, young, lovely, smiling warmly. She invited them inside for a meal. Eurylochus didn't trust it. Something about the smiling animals, the beautiful woman, the empty forest. It felt wrong. He stayed outside, hiding, watching through a window. The rest of the men went in. The woman, her name was Circe, seated them on chairs and benches. She mixed them a drink, cheese, barley meal, honey, and Pramnian wine. But she also added powerful drugs to make them forget their homeland completely. They drank eagerly. They hadn't tasted wine since leaving Aeolus's island. Then Circe struck them with her wand. Their bodies changed instantly. They grew pig snouts, pig bristles, pig hooves. Their forms became those of swine, but their minds stayed human. They could still think, still remember who they were. They tried to speak, but only squeals came out. They were trapped in pig bodies, fully conscious, unable to communicate. Circe herded them into pens. She threw them acorns and cornel berries and mast to eat. The food pigs eat. They wept as they ate. Eurylochus saw everything. He ran back to the ship, terrified, barely able to speak. When he finally told Odysseus what happened, he couldn't even name all the men who'd been lost. The horror had overwhelmed his memory. Odysseus grabbed his sword and bow immediately. He told Eurylochus to lead him back to the palace, but Eurylochus refused. "Don't make me go back there," he begged. "Leave me here. You'll never come back yourself, and you won't rescue any of the others. Let's sail away with the men who are left while we still can." It was reasonable advice. They'd already lost 500 men. Why risk the few survivors? But Odysseus refused to abandon his companions. "Stay here by the ship if you want," he told Eurylochus. "Eat and drink." "But I'm going. Necessity compels me." He headed into the forest alone. On the way, he met a young man on the path. The young man held a golden staff and looked like a prince in his first youth, that age when young men are most graceful. It was Hermes, messenger of the gods, in disguise. "Where are you going, unlucky man, alone through these hills, ignorant of the area?" Hermes asked. "Your companions are penned in Circe's house like pigs in crowded sties. Have you come to free them? I don't think you'll return yourself. You'll stay there with the others, but I'll help you and save you." Hermes explained who Circe was. She was a goddess, daughter of Helios, the sun god. She lived alone on this island, practicing magic, transforming visitors into animals for her amusement or convenience. But Hermes had a solution. He pulled a plant from the ground and showed it to Odysseus. It had a black root and a white flower. The gods called it moly. It was difficult for mortal men to dig up, but gods could do anything. "Take this and go to Circe's house," Hermes said. "It will protect you from her spells. When she strikes you with her wand, draw your sword and rush at her as if you mean to kill her. She'll be terrified. No mortal has ever resisted her magic before. She'll invite you to her bed. Don't refuse, or she won't free your men. But make her swear a great oath by the blessed gods that she won't try to harm you once you're vulnerable." Then Hermes disappeared, returning to Mount Olympus. Odysseus approached Circe's palace. He stood at the gates and called out. Circe heard him and came immediately. She opened the shining doors and invited him in. She seated him on a beautiful silver-studded chair with a footstool. She mixed him a drink in a golden cup, the same mixture she'd given the others. She added her drug to make him forget his homeland. Odysseus drank it. Circe struck him with her wand. "Go to the pigsty now and lie with your companions," she commanded. Nothing happened. Odysseus drew his sharp sword and rushed at her as if to kill her. Circe screamed and ran under his blade. She grabbed his knees, begging for mercy. "Who are you and where are you from?" she cried. "What city? What parents?" "I'm amazed that you drank my drugs and weren't bewitched. No other man has ever resisted these drugs once he's drunk them and they've passed his teeth. You must have a mind that can't be enchanted. You must be Odysseus of many devices. Hermes of the golden wand always told me you'd come here on your way back from Troy. Come now, put away your sword. Let's go to bed together so we can trust each other through love and lovemaking." Odysseus kept his sword drawn. "Circe, how can you ask me to be gentle with you when you've turned my companions into pigs?" he said. "And now you're inviting me to your bed with treacherous intent, planning to make me weak and unmanned once I'm naked. I won't enter your bed unless you agree to swear a great oath that you won't try any other evil tricks against me." Circe swore immediately. She swore by the river Styx, the oath that even gods cannot break. Only then did Odysseus lower his sword. Circe's servants prepared a bath for him. They heated water in a bronze cauldron, bathed him, dressed him in fine clothes. They prepared a feast. But Odysseus sat silent, not eating, his mind troubled. Circe noticed. "Why do you sit there like a mute, Odysseus, eating your heart out instead of touching food and drink? Do you suspect some other trick? You don't need to fear. I've sworn you a mighty oath." Odysseus answered quietly, "Circe, what decent man could bring himself to taste food and drink before rescuing his companions and seeing them with his own eyes? If you really want me to eat and drink, set them free so I can see my loyal friends." Circe went to the pigsty immediately. She drove out the pigs and stood them in a row. She smeared them with a counter-drug. The bristles fell away, and they became men again, younger looking than before, taller, more handsome. They recognized Odysseus and wept, clinging to him. The house rang with their sobbing. Even Circe felt pity. "Go to your ship now," she told Odysseus. "Drag it onto the beach and store your goods and tackle in caves. Then come back with all your companions." Odysseus did as she asked. He returned to the ship and told his men what happened. They were overjoyed to hear their friends were alive. Only Eurylochus objected. "You're all fools if you go there," he said. "She'll turn you into pigs or wolves or lions and make you guard her house by force. It's exactly what the Cyclops did when our companions went into his cave, and Odysseus's recklessness destroyed them. Odysseus almost killed him for that. He reached for his sword, ready to strike Eurylochus down despite their kinship. But the others held him back. "Let's leave him here to guard the ship if you command it," they said, "but lead us to Circe's palace." Even Eurylochus came in the end. He was afraid to be left alone. Circe welcomed them all. She bathed them, rubbed them with oil, dressed them in tunics and warm cloaks. She gave them food and wine until they'd eaten their fill. And Odysseus stayed. For a year he lived with Circe on that island. Homer doesn't judge this. He doesn't present it as a betrayal of Penelope or a moral failure. He just states it as fact. They feasted day after day, eating meat and drinking wine. After all they'd endured, the Cyclops, the Laestrygonians, the terror and loss, Circe's island offered rest. But a year is a long time. Eventually, Odysseus's men came to him. "Captain," they said, "it's time to remember your native land, if you're really fated to survive and reach your high-roofed house and your own country." They were reminding him of who he was, not Circe's lover, not a man living in endless comfort on a magical island, but Odysseus of Ithaca, a man with a home and a purpose. That night, Odysseus told Circe they were leaving. Circe didn't try to stop him, but she gave him a warning. "Before you can reach home, you must make another journey," she said. "You must go to the house of Hades and dread Persephone to consult the spirit of Theban Tiresias, the blind prophet. Even in death, Persephone gave him intelligence. He alone has understanding, while the rest flit about as shadows." Odysseus's spirit was crushed. He sat on the bed and wept. His heart no longer wanted to live and see the sunlight. After everything, the war, the wandering, the loss, now he had to descend into death itself. A man stands on a beach. This is where we began. Odysseus, weeping, staring at the horizon, refusing to forget. Now we know his story. The 10 years of wandering, the monsters, the gods, the choices that cost him everything. We know what he found when he finally made it home. A house full of enemies, a wife who didn't recognize him, a son who'd become a man without him. And we know what he did about it. The Odyssey isn't a story about a journey. It's a story about the cost of journeys, what we lose when we leave, what we become in the leaving, whether we can ever truly return. For 3,000 years, people have been reading this poem and finding themselves in it. Soldiers returning from war who no longer fit into the lives they left behind. Exiles trying to reach home across impossible distances. Anyone who's ever felt that the person they were and the person they've become are strangers to each other. Because the truth is, we're all Odysseus. We all carry versions of his story. The person we were before life changed us. The home we're trying to get back to, even though we know it won't be the same. The gap between memory and reality. And we're all Penelope too, waiting, enduring, weaving and unweaving our days, wondering if the person we're waiting for still exists. We're Telemachus, trying to figure out who we are when our parents are mysteries or ghosts. We're even the suitors sometimes, taking what doesn't belong to us, mistaking strength for power, forgetting that every action has consequences. Homer understood something essential about being human. We're not defined by where we are, but by who we're trying to get back to. Even if we're not sure they're still there. Even if we're not sure we're still the person they remember. The journey matters because we choose to take it. Memory matters because we refuse to forget. Home matters because we decide it does. Not because it's perfect, not because it's easy, but because it's ours. Odysseus could have stayed with Calypso and lived forever. He could have eaten the lotus and forgotten everything. He could have married Nausicaa and started a new life. Instead, he chose the hard thing. He chose to remember, to suffer, to keep trying. He chose mortality over immortality, struggle over peace, Penelope over paradise. Not because he's a hero in the traditional sense, strong, fearless, invincible, but because he refuses to become someone else. Sleep now. Dream of wine-dark seas and rosy-fingered dawns. Dream of the journey home, whatever that means for you. Dream of being found.